I'm here with DYYV Global today, talking to Geoffrey Prescot, who is the CEO of Lepra, which is an amazing charity which raises awareness, prevention and treatment and follow-up for those suffering from leprosy. The charity aims to support people suffering from the disease so that they can live full and normal lives. Thanks for joining us today, Geoff.
Hi, Molly.
So for those people who might not know, please can you give a bit of a background into what leprosy is?
First, leprosy is a bacterial disease. It's been with us for as far back as we can locate in the history of humanity. So it justifies the claim of being the world's oldest disease. It's essentially a skin disease. The bacteria gets into your peripheral nerves and then damages those nerves. According to your level of immunity, that damage can end up with total destruction of the nerve or mild damage to the nerve. The mildest form of leprosy just leaves you with little white skin patches. The worst form, total destruction of the nerves, ends up no feeling, no sensation at all in your feet, hand, and extremities of the body as well, such as the eyes, the eyebrows, the eyelashes, the ears, and for men, the scrotum and testicles and so on. About 5% of the world's population is susceptible to leprosy. We don't know why it's that 5%. It's not an obvious cause. It's not to do with immunosuppression or something. Pretty bad luck. You just have to be in that 5% and you'll get it.
Okay, thank you.
That's a quick synopsis.
Yeah. It sounds so interesting, and from what you were saying, it sounds that leprosy can have a massive effect on people's lives if they have the more severe condition. So I really want to know what the aims of Lepra's work and what sort of work do you carry out?
Yeah, so like most organisations, you have flashy vision and mission statements, and ours is pretty simple: a world free from disability and prejudice due to leprosy. So a world free of disability and prejudice due to leprosy. The interesting bit about that is, why is leprosy interesting to an organisation? Because the numbers are not gigantic on a global scale. It's not like malaria or TB. But why it's interesting is because, one, it causes disability, and two, we could cope with it if it wasn't for the prejudice. Those two things are the standout features of leprosy. To this day, governments, international organisations downplay, deliberately undercount, close down leprosy services. It is a unique disease in the world to have the whole of the world's institutions, ministries of health and so forth, exhibit prejudice in an official way. Many countries have shut down their leprosy services. Many countries still have laws against leprosy, people affected by leprosy. And pretty shocking, most countries are trying to hide those cases of leprosy. There's no other disease like it. So prejudice and disability are the keys here.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there is such a prejudice towards leprosy that you don't see with other diseases?
Yes, it's a very good question. I think depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. But there's one thing which links them all together, and that's somehow history. Every culture, every society has got a memory of leprosy, indeed. So in a lot of the Western world, Western Europe and North America, people refer to Ben-Hur and things like this. Other countries have got it in their traditions. Christians, of course, have got it in the Bible, as do most other religions in their holy books as well. So there's a long history to leprosy. It's deep in the culture, deep in the history. And I think that's what probably gives rise to prejudice. It's something very, very deep and very subconscious. No other disease gets the degree of prejudice that leprosy gets. In many cultures and societies, it's regarded as a curse, to be frank. And even though actually it's just a bacteria, it can also be treated with antibiotics. And so, to be honest, it's a bacteria, it's a disease, you get your antibiotics, you get better unless the damage to the nerves is so severe by then. So really, the big issue is indeed prejudice. That must be to do with culture and history, going back in all religions, all holy books, all societies. Deep, deep, deep stuff.
So What support and interventions do Lepra offer to countries, regions, or individuals suffering from the disease?
So people with leprosy, the largest number are in India, second largest in Brazil, third in Indonesia, and Bangladesh. We ourselves focus on India because about 60% of the world's cases seem to be occurring there, and then Bangladesh as well. So we try to focus. What we try and do is center everything we do around the individual. So first of all, we make sure they get diagnosis and treatment. Sounds simple, it isn't, because many people have shut down the specialist services. It's difficult to get a diagnosis, and therefore it's difficult to access the antibiotics for the treatment. Having done that, we then take care often of health education in the community. People, when they're diagnosed with leprosy, are often thrown out of villages and bullied and so on. So often we have to provide health education to the communities and environment they are. People think, oh yes, but that's just some sort of very poor or very uneducated environment. It's not. Throughout cultures and society, in all levels of education, that prejudice is shown through. So often we have to go and give health education to people who already would normally be classified as, inverted commas, educated. So diagnosis, treatment, health education, community involvement, community participation, get people back, get people accepted, and then of course still with the long-term effects. So one of the unusual things about leprosy is that even once treated, up to 5 years later, your body's immune system may go, what's that bacteria doing lying in my nerves? And set off an immunological response, causing destruction of the nerves again. So often we have to follow people for years and make sure then people get treated for those other immunoreactions that may occur. Of course, those who haven't been treated early enough and have got it so severely may indeed already be disabled, having lost fingers, hands, etc., feet, and so on, and therefore will take care of disability support, disability aids. Number one thing, though, and this should be common really to the whole of the development sector, is we want the countries, the societies where these diseases occur, in this case leprosy, to manage them. We see ourselves as a plaster until we can deal with prejudice and the disability and so on. But actually, we're trying to encourage the local authorities and national authorities to take responsibility. And that's the key thing for us. A great day for us is when actually everything's running, the health system is dealing with people with leprosy as it should, then we can leave. Brilliant. So that's what we're aiming to do.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any major successes in working with local authorities and countries in, like you said, strengthening their system to deal with people suffering from leprosy and offering them the support they need?
Yes, so founded in 1924 and it's now 2021, and I have to say there's been a big advance, big improvement, so that's good news. When Lepra was founded, people would indeed be put in isolated so-called leprosy colonies or just banished or locked up or something. And now in countries such as India and Bangladesh, there's been tremendous advances. I think it's generally accepted by health authorities and so on that people should not be put into sort of leprosy communities or otherwise isolated. So that's a significant advance. We're still not far enough though on a global scale. We still have to go further. But in terms of advances, there is a big advance. We are getting acceptance. Also, if you look at programs in Bangladesh, the Ministry of Health there, we work very closely with, and the Ministry of Health is actually really brought on board and is tackling this now. So hopefully in a few years, things will greatly improve. In other countries, it's just variable, because with the best will in the world, even, we come across people who know what they think is prejudice against leprosy, but actually just provide no services. I always give an example actually closer to home. So if you look at the UK, for example, people in the UK would say, of course, they don't have any prejudice against anyone with any disease. It's bad luck if you get a disease. And yet the pejorative term, this person was treated like a leper, isolated and so on, or that person's a social leper, no one wants to involve or touch them. That's a pejorative term, that's an insulting term. And yet it's still very common in the UK. wouldn't that sort of terminology and attitude, would it be used for other diseases? I use that as an example for the UK to demonstrate that across the world, people may still have a lot of prejudices which they themselves don't quite realise they've got. We see that in that the provision of services is pretty woeful. We see that people who are disabled as a result of leprosy often are denied disability benefits. Just imagine a situation where you're disabled, don't have the ability to walk easily because of damage to your feet and hands and so forth. And someone turns around to you and says, oh, that's caused by leprosy. Oh, we don't count that as disabled then. Yeah, that's still very common across the world. So there's been a tremendous progress, but there's still some pretty serious issues out there.
No, definitely sounds like it. It's a really good point. As you said, Lepra has been established like such a long period of time, and even though tremendous progress has been made, the stigmatization is still there. Is there anything that we as individuals can do potentially to tackle our own prejudices against the disease that we might not be aware of?
Yes, I think in day to day, I think it's always small changes to go surprisingly far. And I think there's two things that immediately strike me. If you're living in a country such as the UK or Western Europe, where leprosy has faded away long ago, incidentally, we don't know why, but it has faded away long time ago. Don't use pejorative language. Don't sort of use language that insults leprosy. So people affected by leprosy is the preferred term, or people with leprosy, as opposed to leper. People affected by leprosy don't like the use of the word leper in any of its various languages, interestingly, because of the great history of prejudice. So one, tidy up the language. Two, actually bring it up. Like so much in life, there's a bit of a social conscience, and that's not always on a mass level, it's on an individual level. So things will improve if there's just greater awareness. Did you know that leprosy still exists? Hundreds and thousands of people get it every year. People don't get treated properly. People don't get diagnosed properly. Just keeping it brought up on the agenda is a step forwards. And I think all of us know in our general lives, that's true. If it's an issue bubbling out there, there's a general perception, and action in the end is easier to do, as opposed to something that people have never heard of. I'm surprised to this day, for example, that when we talk to people, people go, oh, leprosy? Thought that died out hundreds of years ago. Well, yeah, may have done in Europe or the UK, but it hasn't in large parts of the world. It's still there. It's a real disease. We have to tackle it. Thanks, Bonnie.
Amazing. I was wondering, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the work you do? I imagine with increased isolation, people finding it difficult to access health services and support groups, and how have you adjusted your campaign work in light of the pandemic?
Yeah, so the pandemic has been obviously a very significant issue. I think, first of all, the issue of isolation. So it's interesting that many people have had to experience isolation, many people stuck indoors for long periods, many people only able to go out over the last 14, 15 months at different times to different places, but don't have free movement and so on. I think one thing which hopefully that brings home to everyone is welcome to the life of someone affected by leprosy. That's their life. You know, for a lot of people, they're shunned by society and have really restricted lives in terms of movement and freedom. So that's one interesting issue to generally reflect on, the restrictions of COVID-19. And is it any surprise that irrespective of COVID-19, people affected by leprosy, 50% are clinically depressed or diagnosed with anxiety? And so you can see COVID-19 has brought home the impact of living such a restricted life to all of us. And that's the life of people with leprosy at all times anyway. Then to deal with your specific question about COVID-19, we last year, pretty early on, we immediately switched in India mainly to try and help people because of two things. First of all, as PCR testing, it was clear that actually if you're vulnerable, you're at the bottom of society, everyone refuses to deal with you, everyone ignores you and tries to cut your benefits off and tries not to do anything for you, well, you're bottom of the list for PCR tests at COVID-19 as well. So we were running testing, first of all. That's one thing we did. And it has been important because people affected by leprosy are at the bottom of society. People are prejudiced against them. And yet if you fell sick, it was very important that they were diagnosed. We've done that. The second thing we've done throughout the year in Bangladesh as well is provided support through PPE, personal protective equipment, soap and so on, for people who needed it. So mainly people, 80% of all those we gave it to were people affected by leprosy, so that they could protect themselves. Again, we take it for granted in Western Europe, North America and so forth, that people could get gloves and masks and so on. This wasn't and isn't actually the case in Bangladesh and India. So we've given out PPE so people have some level of protection. And then rather critically, particularly in the early months last year, when COVID-19 affected South Asia, a lot of people were driven out of cities, were told to leave the cities and return to the villages. So transport was closed and people had to walk. I don't know if people remember the TV footage of people in India or Bangladesh or whatever, everyone streaming out back to their villages because there were lockdowns, and there are still lockdowns. The effect of that actually for people affected by leprosy, a lot of them, no food, no work. Day work's gone, begging's gone, a lot of the migrant work has gone, and actually the social safety net for people with leprosy is very thin indeed because of prejudice. So actually it's not something we really want to do, but we've had to give food just to keep people alive. So in terms of COVID-19, testing, food, PPE, and now in the last couple of months, vaccination. So people affected by leprosy, again, experiencing a lot of prejudice, so we're trying to get them vaccinated in Bangladesh and India. Give you an example, the websites where people register for vaccination rely on an internet, a contract, a computer, familiarity with the language, there are many languages, and also, of course, the time, energy, effort and money to move from where you are to where those vaccinations then are offered. All of that can be pretty obstructive to people affected by leprosy. We even have come across many, many cases where the most disabled people from leprosy are asked to provide a thumbprint, which they're unable to do due to damage to their thumbs to get vaccines. So the last couple of months, we have actually been supporting people affected by leprosy with COVID-19 vaccination as well. So it's quite a long answer, but that's what we've been doing. And then we shouldn't forget that actually we've also been running our leprosy services. So in terms of diagnosis, treatment, supporting comorbidities and so forth. One of the sad things actually about that is that what we've seen is a reduction of people coming forwards by about 50% in Bangladesh and India because of lockdowns and so on. What that means is those people are going to get diagnosed later, and if it's later, particularly if they're the ones with a lot of leprosy, they're more likely to end up disabled. So that's something which is a bit sad. So the sooner we can get through this COVID, the better, so that actually people feel free to come forwards for diagnosing, and we can safely go out and look for people with leprosy. So that's the COVID-19 answer as it stands on May the 19th, 2021. Changes every day.
Have you been able to tackle the impact of less and less people coming forward for diagnosis at all? As I know it's an issue that's certainly prevalent across a lot of different diseases.
Not really, not in the way that we'd like. So we have what's called active case finding programs. So that's where we actively go out and search for people with leprosy, and we have methodology and a system to do it. Because of COVID-19, that's been very difficult. So one of the new programs we'd wished to start was in the slums of New Delhi, of going through where the rates are very high of leprosy, is going through and finding people there. But actually, because of lockdowns, a lot of this has been prevented. From a public health viewpoint, you're absolutely right, Molly. I think it's not just leprosy, it's many diseases have been affected in terms of active case finding and so forth, and people themselves being willing to come out and forwards to be diagnosed with any illness they may have. It's a little bit worrying, of course, when you're in the realm of infectious diseases, because if you're not being diagnosed and you're infectious, it's going to spread. So, but there's We do what we can. So as I said, almost all our centres are open. There is publicity, particularly in certain states. There is sort of general publicity encouraging people to come forwards. But it's hard, and I think every infectious disease, every programme across the world is finding this, that their general rates of diagnosis are going down because people aren't coming forwards. We hope, though, of course, as in the next few months, we can get going on the backlog. Let's see.
On a slightly more positive note, what's it been like working with people who previously had leprosy, like, as you said, a condition that's really debilitating, there's such a stigma against it, but now they're fully cured from the disease or able to live long, healthy lives?
I think it's a really positive experience. I think it's hard to overestimate how satisfying it is working with leprosy. As you know, Molly, a lot of people who work with lepra have come from long careers in other parts of aid and development. And one of the reasons they come to lepra is because actually people suffering from leprosy suffer so much prejudice. So you can have a real impact, so you have people who, for example, you probably heard or met people when you were at lepra, but have, people who've been thrown out of school, little girls rejected from school at the age of 9 and subjected to bullying, and then have that all sorted out, have them back in school, have that welcome back, have it explained to the school and so on that it's possible. That's always great news. To have people who actually have got mild case of leprosy, but because of the label of being divorced and of their families of falling apart and so on, and to be able to go in, not only treat them, but to slowly help to put their lives back together. That's tremendously satisfying. I think it's unusual in the sort of developments field to have so much level of satisfaction, because it's a disease of prejudice, and we can confront that prejudice and really improve people's lives. Very satisfying.
And just to close, what would you say to someone who wants to help in the fight against leprosy but doesn't really know what to do, how they can get involved?
Okay, I think we touched on this. I think first of all, try and bring it up. Just keep it there. Try not to use pejorative language, insulting language. Try to keep it on the agenda. Keep it on the agenda just to remember there are people with leprosy out there is another thing. And of course, please support. We're a charity, for example. The reason why organisations like Lepra exist is because of prejudice. So many official services and officials don't want to deal with leprosy, have closed down the services, refused to meet people with leprosy, refused to give out the medicine required and so on. So it ends up little small NGOs, and there is only a handful of us in the world, carrying the burden of this disease. We would hope one day that we are unnecessary. But in the meantime, if people want to support us, please go ahead. www.lepra.co.uk. So yeah, Lepra, just banging Lepra on Google. We as a charity, we always say that, but honestly, just keep it in mind. I think think of terms of publicity, consciousness raising, advocacy. Just keeping it in mind. So many of us support different charities, do so many things, but we all know as well, just keeping things on the agenda has a huge impact.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for talking to us.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.